So I painted this miniature and I want to talk about it. Greetings and welcome to Mediocre Minis. No, I'm being serious. I painted a thing and now I want to talk about it. Well, more specifically, I painted the thing and there's something interesting about the miniature or the process and it's worth discussion, so here I am talking about it. That's probably a more apt way of doing it. Yeah, this is a little bit different. This isn't really going to be a tutorial of any sense, but it's just because I have a miniature and there's something worth talking about. Every mini, regardless of what it is, who it came from manufacturer-wise, who painted it, what it's a miniature of, every mini has a story to tell or something to say. And this miniature right here, this is the Demigod of Athena from War Gods of Olympus. It's a miniatures game by Crocodile Games. And this miniature had a few things to say. It had a few things to say about the cloth, about patience, and about skin. So let's do that. Let's stop here. So I painted this miniature and I want to talk about it. Greetings and welcome to Mediocre Minis. History is awesome. In addition to being the most superior of all academia, it also provides a gateway into so many different things. For instance, I love ancient Greece and ancient Rome. These ancient civilizations are just something I've always found to be fun and interesting and different. I like the heroes, the stories, the villains. As part of my enjoyment of ancient Greece, I picked up a few miniatures for the game War Gods of Olympus from Crocodile Games. More specifically, this Demigod of Athena. And today we're going to paint her up and see what type of things that she has to tell us along the way. One of the stories that this miniature had for me was, of course, her skin, and I wanted to do something different. My normal go-to for a quick and easy skin tone is a base coat of Bugman's Glow, then a highlight of Cadian Flesh Tone, and then a final highlight of Kislev Flesh if needed for my regular go-to skin tone. And I wanted to do something different. These are heroes of Greek armies and of ancient Greece, and I wanted to do something different to hopefully fit more of that style, that time period, and what people actually look like. After some research and some experimentation, I settled on this paint recipe. It is a base coat of golden shadow, followed up by highlights of tanned leather and rosy skin. Using these three colors, I painted the face as I normally would, with of course, the whole base coat of a golden shadow, smaller highlights of tanned leather, and then use some very thin layers to blend it together, and a final few point highlights of rosy skin to really make the highest points, like the cheekbones, top of the nose, and other prominent areas of the skin stand out. But I had one problem with it, and it looked too golden, like really golden. Like gold, and I wasn't quite what I was going for. Like, yeah, it all made sense in my head, like, okay, this is how I wanted to paint, but it was missing something. And what that something was actually magenta. It sounds kind of odd to use magenta, but it worked out very, very well. See, I used a very, very, very thin layer of magenta paint. This is... What is it, actually? Where is it? Here it is. Dark magenta from Probacryl. This is... Yeah, dark magenta from Probacryl was really the answer. I took a very, 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 very thin amount of this magenta, thinned it down substantially to the point where there was barely any paint or liquid on my brush, and gave the face a very thin coat of it. Now, the reason why I chose magenta is it actually brings life into a face. The reason being is that we all have undertones to our skins. You have, reds and oranges and yellows and blues and purples. All of these undertones to our skin, from the blood in our veins and our muscles and our cellular structure, changes how our faces look. And adding this thin layer of magenta over the top of this golden skin made it look real. It made it look alive, and it actually put life into it. It's not something I generally would normally go to. I would just look at the miniature, and think, well, that doesn't look quite right, but I guess that's how it has to be. No, there was an answer, and the answer was, of course, in magenta, something that I'm definitely going to remember going forward and experiment and try with different shades of magenta or just different colors in general. What if I were to use a dark blue, for instance? So that's one lesson in story that this miniature taught me is keeping in mind that even you use the correct color combination or a color combination that you like for skin, sometimes you do need a little bit more, and that is a little bit of life in a dark magenta or blue, or who knows, let's see what other colors we can potentially try in the future and see how that works out. Another story that this miniature had for me was the cloth. Traditionally speaking, when you look at warriors and worshippers and devotees of Athena, blue, gold, a little bit of silver, and white were generally represented as some of her colors or predominant colors on her. So I figured with the cloth, well, let's just make it white. And I'm not very used to using white cloth or painting white cloth. It's one of those hard, weird colors to paint with white. And one of the things that I discovered to do was use a blue and go from a blue to a bluish white or a whitish blue. And in the end, it reads as white. So how I ended up painting this whitish blue or cloth that looks like it's white, but it's not really, is actually started off with Mirage Blue. It's a color of paint from Green Stuff World. And that was effectively my base tone. And this bluish gray worked out really nice for a shadow color. And definitely was a suitable base coat, especially with the direction I was going, because the next paint in line after that was Woven Gray. And again, it has this light gray with a little hint of blue in it. And that ended up working out perfectly, because after some very thin layers of these colors mixed together and then on top of each other, what it ends up doing is making a transition from this bluish gray to a bluish white. It ended up being relatively easy to do. It just took time. It was an exercise in patience of using very thin layers of this Mirage Blue and Woven Gray on top of each other very slowly, and then adding in a little bit of white. And I mean just regular white, brightening this Woven Gray up, making it a little bit closer to white, a little bit lighter with very thin coats. And after a time, it begins to look pretty white. It's an off-white, but your eyes perceive it differently just with the contrast of the darker shades in the recesses. This is something else I learned in this first real time I took a big attempt at a whitish cloth, and this seems to work out pretty well. I'm kind of looking forward to trying this again, seeing, well, can I use other colors other than blue? Can I use a tan, a brown, maybe even a red, the transition from? But if anything, it's worth noting that just patience, thin layers, and adding small amounts of white really ended up being the key to making this cloth work. So an interesting thing about Athena, and I know this is a demigod of Athena, but Athena's still tied in, so this is still worth talking about. Athena is mostly known for not having a mother. That one day she burst out of Zeus's head and joined her fellow gods on Olympus, taking some of the wisdom and knowledge out of Zeus, and partially why she is so revered and intelligent and tactical. Well, there's actually another story that serves as a prelude to that. Yeah, so a long time ago, Zeus took on this nymph. Her name was Metis as his wife. And with his wife, Zeus being Zeus, he's doing his thing. But he realizes, and he's told a prophecy, that Metis would bear 2 children. And the son of Metis will rise up and overthrow him, which Zeus didn't want because he overthrew his father and his father overthrew his father, so he didn't want to have that happen. So he did the most rational thing possible. He tricked Metis into turning into a fly, and while she was a fly, he swallowed her. But see, here's the thing. At the time, Metis was already pregnant with Athena at the time. So you have Zeus, who tricked his nymph wife or lover, Metis, into turning into a fly. She, while pregnant with Athena, turned into a fly and is now inside Zeus's belly. Well, over time, she ends up merging with the subconscious and the mind of Zeus. It is where Athena is born. Metis gives birth to Athena while part of Zeus's subconscious inside of his mind. And she spends years, taking care of Athena and training her and teaching her and having her grow up and giving her clothing and crafting her armor, all within the subconscious of Zeus's mind, by the way. Yeah. And then eventually, she gets this beautiful armor and she's ready, and Athena's ready to go out and join the world and join her fellow gods and leave the subconscious mind of Zeus. So what she does is she takes her shield, which was again crafted by her mother, Metis, inside the subconscious mind of Zeus after she was turned into a fly, and starts banging the shield on inside of Zeus's skull, just sitting there banging her shield up against it. And of course, this gives Zeus a bad headache. So naturally, the only thing that he does is go up to the other gods and like, hey, I got a bad headache, when it's not really, well, it's a headache, but it's Athena just banging her shield. So then Hephaestus, doing the most logical thing possible, just takes a hammer and just whacks Zeus on the forehead with it, which causes his head to split open, and Athena bursts out and joins the world. HESIOD, lines 886 to 890, and also line 929. All right, there's really not too much else fancy or interesting about the rest of the model when it comes to lessons that I've learned and stories that the mini told me. But it's still worth mentioning how I finish it up. For instance, the armor, I kept it relatively simple. I really wanted the skin and the face to show off. So the armor, I wasn't necessarily worried about making it stand out or look over the top fancy. So all I really did was I started with bronze and then added a little bit of gold to it. A bronzy-ish color, for in this instance it's tinny tin, a Vallejo game color, and then added polished gold into it, and slowly added more gold, and then eventually it just has a nice shine to it. Leather wasn't as commonly used, especially for armor. Most of the time you had cloth armor, breastplate, helmet, shield, sword, spear, and that was about it. In rare instances, you might have shin guards or wrist guards, but most of the time you only had a handful of things. And leather definitely was used in other instances and was expensive, not really for armor. But again, demigod, so why not? And I'm not saying I didn't care too much about it, I just didn't care as much as the rest of the model. I just give it a simple dark base coat of blue, added in some lighter blue, and highlighted up from there. The leather got kind of the same treatment as the armor, kept it relatively simple. And of course the hair, same thing happened with the hair, kept it a dark brown. Started off with a base of Rhinox hide, a darker brown, then highlighted with Morphang brown on top of that, mix in a small amount of an off-white, and give a few other highlights on top of that. Very simple highlights and shading with the hair, same as the leather, same as the armor, because that wasn't the main focus of the model. I know the plume is technically part of the helmet, but I decided that it took a few twists and turns, so it's worth mentioning separately. Since I didn't know what to do, I started off with just a dark blue base coat, figured I could just go with it from there. And then I realized that I didn't want to have to fuss around with a dark blue as much in the future, so I just repainted it with ivory from Probacryl. And with that lighter base coat, it was much easier to take a lighter blue and then draw in or paint in these nice, I guess you can say, stripes or something that you would think of would be on this style of helmet. This looks to be like a Roman type of helmet, and the Romans took this idea, by the way. So many instances, it might just be easier just to repaint an area completely. Trust me, when we take a look at a Demigod of Apollo, we'll go over repainting areas. Well, trust me, there's some repaint in that one. But starting off with a lighter base coat with the ivory made the lighter blue much, much easier to put on. Needed fewer coats. Doing multiple coats of something over top of that darker blue just would have been a nightmare and would have taken forever. So I just started from scratch with a lighter base coat. Sometimes it's easier just to say to heck with it, start a whole area over. So onto the weapons. I wanted to keep these, or at least the spear, relatively simple. First and foremost with the spear, I know the tip should not be bronze, it should be iron. Yeah, I know iron was much more widely used for weapon tips, swords, and the whatnot, but bronze just looked cooler. The rest of the spear, of course, I also kept simple with the wooden shaft. I'm pretty bad at painting wood. So what I ended up doing was just using a simple dark brown base coat and adding in a little bit lighter of a brown to essentially draw some lines and streaks. I hope to eventually figure out how to use wood the best in the future. Next off, the other remaining, I guess you can say, weaponry is the shield, which also was a pain to paint. Now, the Gorgon head was difficult to paint, mostly getting around all of those individual snakes. What I started off with painting the whole shield bronze and then realizing at least the inside to get the blue area completed and then go back over top of the bronze again. This took a lot of time. This took a massive amount of time. One thing I will say is these magnifying glasses that I wear, if it wasn't for these, that would have been a nightmare. Definitely was not worth straining my eyes over, so I always use these at this point, and there's nothing wrong with using magnification. In fact, I would probably recommend using magnification. You don't want to overstrain your eyes. So one thing interesting about the shield is it has the head of Medusa upon it. Stories of the Gorgons and Medusa, this is a great example of showing when one story is just simply better than the other and just becomes more widely accepted. Anyway, Gorgons. Gorgons were actually the daughters of a primordial sea god and a sea monster by the name of Ceto. So Ceto and the sea god had children, and the Gorgons came from that. And one of the reasons why Athena adopted the Gorgon head as one of her symbols is through the story of Perseus, and the head of Medusa was brought to Athena and the gods, and Hephaestus took the head and like pushed it into a helmet and into a shield and a helmet and all this stuff, and now it's part of her regalia. Or also more accepted is that the Gorgon head can instill fear into your enemies, and using that to have control in battlefield supremacy worked out well for Athena, so that is a little bit more accepted for fear into enemies. Oh, and Gorgon blood sometimes has healing properties. Isn't that interesting? Assembly was pretty straightforward. Just a simple grip and twist of the paper clips removed all of the bits from their holders with relative ease. A little bit of cleanup with a hobby knife to get some of the extra super glue, and then just glued the miniature together. But after the glue was dried and it got the miniature all set the way I wanted it to, it was time to move on to the base. The basing I kept, much like everything else, relatively simple. I used a mixture of a dark brown, Rhinox hide as my base coat, then later on added in additional greens and even a little bit more brown, some washes, and swirled all of these colors together on the base. My intention really was to make a trampled grassy field. Once that dried, I just took a few static grass tufts and super glued them down. Overall, I think the base came out okay. I don't love it, I don't hate it. I think the brighter green tufts really is what's throwing me off. I think if they were all darker, it wouldn't be so bad. Next time around, it's something for me to go a little bit slower on, I guess, and to keep in mind what I'm actually putting on the base, as opposed to just doing it. And there we have it. The Demigod of Athena is complete. It should be Demigoddess, actually. Anyway. Overall, I did enjoy painting this miniature. Got to try out some new techniques and skills with the cloth and the skin. Those types of skills I know will carry over into future miniatures. Also, another chance to use my basic eyes. Those turned out really well also, and I'm glad that they still look well even on a different type of miniature altogether. So how about you? Have you ever tried to paint white cloth? Have you ever had issues with too golden or a skin tone that wasn't quite right? What did you run into, and what did you do to fix it? I'm very curious to know. Thank you again for watching. This is Mediocre Minis, and may the divine light your path.